But it was really great. You all know this, but because of Hank and some others, we now can go back and watch what you missed. If you're going to see part 2 of Dr. Bob Lynch, you probably want to see part 1. And I know you all know that, but it is when you look at that YouTube page, there's all those great speakers we've had this year. It makes you want to go back and see everybody you missed. So you can do that because of the forethought of making it be on tape. And of course, Betsy makes it work every week. So that wouldn't be, we'd be without that. Now, I just want to say one thing. Microplastics was Bob's topic earlier this year. And when we've had conversations about what people liked, that one had the biggest impact on people. How many of you bought new cutting boards when you went home after that? Yeah. Bob, look. Bob is always wanting to know the impact. Bob is an outcomes-based physician. He wants to know the outcome. So I was really excited to hear what he had to say last week, and I'm thrilled that you're back again, Dr. Lynch, to share your continuing research on making us healthier. Thanks, Bob.
How about? As always, Betsy turns me on. So, well, good morning, and thanks for coming. And I wasn't sure anybody would be here this week after last week, but it's good to see this. So, the question, what's the difference between God and a doctor? God doesn't think he's a doctor. It's a little slow on the uptake. That's okay. Everybody awake? Oh, well, I think some people didn't either, so it's okay. It was God doesn't think he's a doctor. So, anyway, better to be thought a fool than to open one's mouth and eliminate all doubt. And so here we are. So I think this is an incredibly important issue in terms of preventing these chronic diseases that are present and, of course, will kill us. And so my opinion is, and my experience is that not near enough is being done to prevent illnesses. And the reason I say that is for about the past 50 years, up until 2010, life expectancy in the United States of America had steadily increased. And over the previous 50 years, the occurrence of cardiovascular disease had steadily decreased until 2010. In 2010, that's all plateaued. The reduction in cardiovascular disease and the enhancement of lifestyle. Beginning in 2019, 6 years ago, the incidence of cardiovascular disease has progressively increased substantially. For a while, cancer created more death and illness than cardiovascular disease did, but now that has stopped. And cardiovascular disease has progressively increased since 2019 to the point that every year 800,000 Americans die of heart disease. That's about one heart attack per day every 31 seconds. A death occurring one day about every 83 seconds. To the point that 2,300 deaths occur on a daily basis, every day throughout the year. So it sort of puts it in perspective as to the impact and the significance, particularly of cardiovascular disease. And so I'm going to emphasize cardiovascular disease because while it's one of the six, or one of the top four diseases that will kill us, it's also the one that's most amenable to preventing cardiovascular disease, and I'll talk about that. So here's the 6 leading drivers of health: blood pressure, lipids, which are this cholesterol, and particularly LDL, physical activity, the presence or absence of it, nutrition, obviously, sleep, and something that we won't be talking about here, which is substance abuse. So John F. Kennedy said, it is not enough for a great nation to merely have added new years to life, but our objective must also be to add new life to those years. And the best way, another individual, Peter Drucker, said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And so my role here today, what I hope to accomplish, is to help you create a better health, healthier living, a formula for health, to focus on these 6 leading drivers of health, and I'll talk about each one of these individually as we go along. So the top 4 chronic killers are cardiovascular disease, in that order, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, and that type of thing, obesity, and diabetes. So you may ask, well, why has the incidence of cardiovascular disease increased since 2019? No one knows for sure, but a lot of people think it's probably related to what's called a diabetes epidemic. In other words, a combination of diabetes and the combination of obesity are creating this increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So, what is it? These are other factors that are implicated in poor health. I think the first one, the inflammation, is becoming progressively known as a prominent factor associated particularly with cardiovascular disease and also with cancer and also with the neurodegenerative diseases. So infectious agents, of course, impact our health. Our mental health has a lot of issues with it. And then there are rare diseases that occur. So talked about this, and so want to talk about, well, what is heart disease? Well, for the most part, when I talk about heart disease, I'm talking about what's called coronary artery disease. In other words, the buildup of plaque, lipids within the wall of the artery. And so, as you can tell from this slide here, it's something that takes several years to occur, beginning usually in teenage years, but certainly young adults, individuals in their 20s. And this is known from autopsies that have been done in individuals that were killed during the Vietnam War. And so over a period of time, this buildup of cholesterol, LDL, particularly what are called lipoproteins, layers in the wall of the artery and begins to progressively narrow it. As it reaches a severe degree, it can cause symptoms. A heart attack is caused when this cholesterol plaque becomes fissured, it becomes ruptured, and a clot forms, and the clot is what totally blocks off the blood flow to the heart and creates a heart attack. So it's a long-standing process that can occur, and obviously having an extensive amount of this plaque buildup in the arteries of the heart, particularly if it limits blood flow, it's associated with increased risk of heart attack, increased risk of death. Also, even if it doesn't cause symptoms, if it's present to a mild degree, but it's there, or present to a moderate degree, but does not cause symptoms, it is also associated with risk of a heart attack and also associated with risk of death. I emphasize that because therefore it puts the impetus on early detection, and it puts the impetus on prevention. You know, in my career, I wound up taking care of a lot of people after the fact. They had a heart attack, were having a heart attack, and had damaged their heart, had heart failure. And I began to realize that that's not where we should put our focus. We should put our focus on preventing all that in the first place. And there are ways to prevent that, and I may even tell you about it. Other things that affect it, of course, are uncontrolled high blood pressure, anything that puts a stress on the wall of the arteries of the heart, the high LDL, high blood sugar, diabetes, and cigarette smoking. All of this, as I've mentioned, is preventable through lifestyle and early detection and attention. Same things that apply to the heart apply to the brain. So a lot of this information will be applicable to protecting the brain. So what is early detection? So there are traditional risk factors, and those are high blood pressure, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Those are elevated cholesterol, LDL particularly, which I'll talk about, diabetes, tobacco use, cigarette smoking, and family history. So what do we do to determine risk? And so the first thing is, well, traditional risk factors. If a person has those, 1, 2, 3, 4 more of risk factors, and obviously the risk progressively increases related to the number of risk factors that there are. And so evaluating, being aware of those risk factors and managing those risk factors is one way to prevent heart disease. I'm going to tell you about another factor that I think is very important, and this is rarely being done. It's called a polygenic cardiovascular risk factor. Has anybody heard of that? Anybody? None? Nobody. Wow. Well, it can help determine a person's risk for cardiovascular disease. It is above and beyond and a corollary to the traditional risk factors that I've mentioned. And what it is, it's a numerical estimate of an individual's risk for cardiovascular disease. It's calculated by analyzing a variety of up to millions of single, what are called nucleopeptides across the entire genome, and can estimate the lifetime risk of developing cardiovascular disease, such that if, let's say, you have this done, and you wind up in the 97th percentile, because it's a comparison of you versus the rest of the population that's been evaluated. What does that mean? That means that you have a risk of developing heart disease or whatever the disease that's greater than 97% of the population. Polygenic risk factors can also determine risk of prostate cancer, can also determine risk for diabetes, can also determine risk for neurodegenerative disorders, for Alzheimer's. So it's actually something that has not become, as evidenced by this, has not become a routine part of medical practice, but some authorities think that it should be. So how do you get it? You can't go into your doctor's office and say, I'd like to have this. So you get it through like 23andMe, Ancestry.com. 23andMe has an interesting explanation about what I'm talking about here if you want to pursue that further. I want to mention another thing. Inflammation is a marker and related to this process that I'm talking about, coronary artery disease, and that's something that should be routinely checked. It's called an HSCRP. And the reason that that's important is this. The highest risk is if there's high cholesterol and high HSCRP, but the second highest risk is a normal cholesterol but a high HSCRP. So if you have a normal cholesterol and think that you're not at risk, an HSCRP should be done as well. The third highest risk is to have basically have a high cholesterol and a normal CRP. And then the lowest risk is normal both, normal cholesterol and normal CRP. So it's an important test that is not sophisticated, should be done. There are other ways to determine if a person is at risk. There are now what are called AI plays a role in evaluating the retinal arteries. Taking a photo of the arteries in the retina can be associated with presence of calcium in arteries of the heart. So a lot of ways to determine if you're at risk not only, but also if you have the disease itself. Well, what are good screening tests? A stress test is really not. Even a stress test combined with nuclear scanning of the heart, it only will detect a blockage that's about 70%. So if you have a 50% blockage, you'll pass the test. But, most heart attacks occur with 50% blockages that become fissured, ruptured, form a clot, and so on. Will not be detected with the stress test. So I don't think that's a good test. Some of my friends have it, and they think that they're fine, but I don't think so because it's just not good enough. So what about a calcium scoring scan? That's pretty good. Good screening test, no risk, simple to do, not very expensive, and it will detect if there is calcium present in the plaque in the arteries of the heart. But sometimes there is not calcium present and there is plaque, but it will miss that. So another test that can be done is what's called a CT coronary angiogram. And so that is a non-invasive test, inject dye into a vein in your arm or hand, and you can actually visualize, actually see the arteries of the heart. And so that's a very, very, very good way to evaluate risk. So, let me stop a minute and say this. If somebody asks me or says, a penny for my thoughts, and I say, well, I'll interject, put in my 2 cents worth, what happens to that other penny? I don't know. So if we're here to help others, that's our purpose in life. What are the others here for? So you sort of, little makes you think, or made me think. All right. So what about LDL and drug treatment? And I'm going to focus on this a lot because there's been innumerable studies and information that correlates LDL cholesterol with cardiovascular risk. The higher the LDL, the greater the risk, and vice versa, the lower. And so therefore, a lot of focus has been on that. The first trial was published in 1994, which was a trial of statin use in individuals that had heart disease and had high cholesterol. And lo and behold, it reduced the risk of subsequent heart attacks, death, having to have bypass surgery or stents or so on by up to 30%. And so that was the beginning of a progressive number of trials over the next several years, all of which have demonstrated a reduction in cardiovascular events, having to have bypass surgery, stents, be in the hospital with a heart attack, and so on and so on. So now there's really a kind of what's called a race to the bottom in terms of what is an appropriate level of LDL cholesterol. You know, the national guidelines will say, all Americans should have an LDL level of 100 or less. And so, like every national guideline that has been published in my lifetime as a cardiologist, has always been late to the show, for sure, because there is now this trend to be progressively more aggressive about lowering cholesterols. First and foremost, it's not quite clear what the optimal level of LDL cholesterol should be, but studies have shown that individuals that already have heart disease should have a level of at least 50 or below. My own personal opinion is that for anybody, it should be 70 or less. And so I will interject something here. This information that I'm giving today, or material I'm giving today, is for informational purposes and maybe entertainment purposes as well to some degree. But you should check with your doctor before you implement any measures to be aggressive about lowering LDL. You should check with your doctor about what's optimal blood pressure and achieve that. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Nonetheless, there was also a recent trial that said in individuals that had heart disease, they were managed and drove the cholesterol down to 20, their LDL down to 20, without any harm and with benefit. You know, when we're born, our LDL level is 0. So it's not fine to have it be 100 or 110 or so on. Well, there's also a direct correlation of cardiovascular events and triglyceride levels. The higher the triglycerides, the greater the cardiovascular events are. What about good cholesterol? Well, sort of inconsequential in a way. I mean, it's thought to be kind of a scavenger, a Pac-Man, to help remove LDL from the plaques that build up in arteries. But for the most part, it's not a big factor. In fact, paradoxically, the good cholesterol, the HDL, can be too high, and that's associated with cardiovascular risk as well. There are a couple of other tests that can and should be done. I'll just tell you the names and we'll go on. But it's called the Lp(a) and ApoB. These are also indicators of cardiovascular risk. For instance, it's interesting that the one I mentioned, ApoB, it can be elevated in about 20% of people that have normal LDLs, but it's still a risk factor. In fact, it's probably a more powerful risk factor than LDL level is. Lp(a) and ApoB. So let's see, we talked about this. High blood pressure. High blood pressure. Do you know about 2/3 of Americans have high blood pressure? 90% age 65 or greater have high blood pressure. So it's the most lethal and progressive pandemic that there is worldwide and in the United States of America. High blood pressure causes 1 out of every 6 deaths in America. Worldwide, only 20% of individuals have the blood pressure under control. You'd think we're a lot better in the United States. Well, we are somewhat, 50%. We spend $4 trillion a year on healthcare, and 50% of people do not have a healthy blood pressure. Well, I know you're going to ask. You're going to ask me, what's a healthy blood pressure? And so that is, science says this, trials say this, 120/80 or less. So for every 20 millimeters of mercury greater than systolic blood pressure is above 115, every 20, so 135, that doubles the risk of having cardiovascular disease, having a stroke. So it's untreated, poorly treated for the most part. It is phenomenally important. It's very, very pervasive in terms of its frequency and occurrence. Treating high blood pressure with drugs, evidence for that began in the 1970s when antihypertensive medications were first introduced, and it was proven to show about a 75 to 85% reduction in consequences of high blood pressure. So that's important to know. But do you know that only 1/3 of individuals that have high blood pressure consistently take their medications? And so no wonder that it's close to a pandemic. In fact, it creates more death than what occurred with COVID. It also affects younger individuals as well. So that's high blood pressure. So, well, there's the heart-brain connection. I've mentioned that high blood pressure, the high LDL, diabetes, inflammation influence the blood vessels that supply the brain. And so what's good for the heart is good for the brain. We'll get to that. Nutrition. Well, that's a good one. So what's an unhealthy, let's do this. What's an unhealthy diet and what's a healthy diet? Because there's so much information and there's so much controversy and it's just not known. But one thing that's known is ultra-processed foods. They are associated clearly with adverse cardiovascular events to the point that it basically affects a lot of things. It affects risk of diabetes for sure, increases the risk, about a 40% higher risk of diabetes if you ingest ultra-processed foods, 23% increased risk of hypertension, a 55% increased risk of obesity, 66% increased risk of cardiovascular disease, regular consumption of ultra-processed red meat. What's that? Bologna, bacon, sausage, hot dogs is associated with higher risk of dementia, fatty liver disease, inflammatory bowel disease, and depression. There's a 62% increased risk in all-cause mortality. It's linked to which is linked to more than 4 servings a day of ultra-processed foods. Poor diet is responsible for about 20% of all deaths throughout the world. So Dr. Bob, what's a healthy diet? Well, that's not a mystery. I mean, I've mentioned this before, and I'm sure everybody adheres to this, but Jim, I know you do. So there's over 60,000 diet books and articles present, and here we are, no one really knows. And most of the research on nutrition is not good. Not good. That's why we have so much. There's a new diet that comes along, whether it's a keto diet or paleo diet or whatever that comes along. But there's 2 that have some science behind them. Obviously, first and foremost is a plant-based diet. I mean, that clearly is associated with a reduction in cardiovascular events and mortality and so on. The problem there is most people can't really do that or don't want to do that, and I understand that. For those that do, I encourage them and say that's fine. The diet that has evidence behind it is the Mediterranean diet. And you've heard this before, and I've said it before, and you've heard it elsewhere, but it's a fact. It is a fact. I mean, the early study that was done, I think it involved about 12.5 million people that were on the Mediterranean diet, were not on the Mediterranean diet, and demonstrated that there was reduction in heart disease, strokes, and so on for those individuals that were on the Mediterranean diet. So it's not a mystery as to what a Mediterranean diet is. It's fruits, it's vegetables, it's the legumes, the bean family, it's the whole grains, it's the nuts, it's the seeds, it's healthy fats. Do you know this? Half a tablespoon per day of olive oil decreases the risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases by up to 20%. Something simple to do, reduces risk. Another thing that's simple to do is to get in 30 grams of nuts. No, not of nuts, I'm the nut, no. 30 grams of fiber per day. 30 grams of fiber per day reduces the risk of heart disease by about 31%. Simple things to do. Simple things to do. A handful of nuts I mentioned. So that's diet.
Is that anti-fiber or soluble versus unsoluble? Which one is better?
I think that's a good question. Pretty sure it is. That's. I think that it's soluble. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think so.
What about vegan? Is a vegan diet a healthy diet?
Yeah, in terms of cardiovascular risk for high blood pressure, risk for strokes and so on, I think it is, yeah. Question was, is a vegan diet healthy? Well, so moving on, I'm going to talk about the other thing. Nope, not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about here we go. This is the one you've been waiting to hear about, I know. So this, of all the things that I'm saying here today, this is probably the most important. Exercise, there's tons of science behind the value of exercise and what exercise does to your heart and to your brain. It's like a miracle drug. I was asked, is there a pill that will no, it wasn't. I'll make this part up here, Jack. But it was, is there a pill that replaces exercise? And well, not exactly. But he wanted to know, is there a pill that can combine all of this in terms of treating the cholesterol, in terms of treating blood pressure, and so on? And there is. It's called the poly pill. It's just never, for some reason that I don't understand, it was never taken off and not received much publicity to it. So what's exercise? It protects against heart disease. It improves the function of the heart. It improves LDL and the lipid profile. It improves, decreases body-wide inflammation. And it improves, last but not least, it improves immune function. So what is recommended? Well, it's 150 minutes per week of exercise, which is associated with a 31% reduction in dying. And people live about 4.5 years longer. What is moderate exercise? Well, as you know, it's walking, bicycling, gardening, anything that elevates the heart rate, anything that increases the breathing rate, yet you can still carry on a conversation. Above and beyond that, you can't. So the other thing to do about exercise, I think it's very, very important to add balance training as well as strength training. Been associated with reduction in cardiovascular risk. So every minute counts. Even when you can't exercise regularly, you can move every hour, do something that will benefit your heart and your brain. Okay, we did all the nutrition, and so here we go. Chronic stress and poor sleep. Not a good thing. Increases aging of the brain and aging of the heart. Sleep is an issue. I'm not going to get into too much. Well, a couple of people are asleep back there. Maybe we can ask them what they're doing. I don't know. I don't know. There's something that makes me say those things here. I don't know what it is. Anyway, aim for 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep a night. Another thing that's important, practice calm. How you do it? Prayer, meditation, mindfulness, breathing, gratitude. All of these things have been scientifically associated with a reduction in risk of these chronic killers that I talked about. We have the power of connection.
Can you define quality in your sleep? Your comment is quality sleep. What does that mean?
Well, I have no idea. So I don't know. Well, quality sleep is sleeping continuously with not too much REM sleep for 7 hours, and awakening, feeling refreshed and ready to give the talk somewhere. That's a poor explanation. Beyond that, I'm sure there's some definitions of it. You know, you can wear the bands and all. It'll evaluate your sleep. One person did it and said they were told, "You must have slept with 6 other people last night." The power of connection and purpose, strong relationships and a sense of purpose, particularly predict longevity just as much as having high blood pressure does. People with strong social ties, and I'm preaching to the choir here because everybody here does, but with strong social ties live longer, and if they do become ill, then they recover faster. Very, very important. So I'm going to leave some time for questions, or maybe one. Bringing it all together. So we can't change our age, that's for sure, but we can change how we age. All of these diseases are not inevitable parts of aging. Heart disease is not. Brain disease is not. It's never too late. Never too late. People will say, well, here I am, I'm 85, why should I do any of this stuff right now? But, as far as cholesterol lowering, there's actually evidence to say that lowering cholesterol works even in individuals 85 years or greater. It does decrease the risk of having a heart attack or stroke or something serious happen. Well, personal responsibility matters a lot. The reality is we don't have a healthcare system that is designed, as it is now, to do this. We have a healthcare system that's focused on treating acute illnesses, doing tests, doing procedures, and so on. Physicians are paid for doing tests and doing procedures and so on. They're not paid for spending 30 minutes to talk to a person about how to lower their blood pressure effectively, or what to do with their exercise, or what their cholesterol levels should be. We have a perverse system that is not designed to institute these preventive measures that I'm talking about here. So you have to take your own personal responsibility to do it. So the 6 leading drivers of health that I've talked about are all amenable to modifying, for sure. I think that there's substantial evidence that paying attention to and managing all of these things I talk about will result in better health and prevent illness and prevent disability. And when I talk about living longer, longevity isn't about avoiding death. Not about it. It's about embracing life fully, having a strong heart, having a strong mind, a sharp mind, but nothing works unless you do. So, with that in mind, I'll be happy to answer one question. Dave first, then Buzz, and Buzz is first, and Dave, forget it.
Bob, there's been a lot of difference in the value of, say, a glass of wine per day. Is alcohol totally bad for you?
You're gonna think he's a plant. Alcohol is the enemy of man. The Bible says we're to love our enemies. It took a while. No, actually, that's a very good question. It is, because we've gone through a variety of different answers to that question. For a while, it was thought there was sort of a J curve. In other words, the J curve meaning if you had no alcohol, you were at higher risk. But further thinking about that, that's a confounding thing. Most people that are severely ill, et cetera, don't drink alcohol, so it confounded that data. So my answer is there is no health benefit to alcohol at all whatsoever. No health benefit. Now, if you're having a glass of wine and in a social situation, a meal with somebody, a group of friends over and so on, it's absolutely fine. It's not going to harm anything, hurt anything, but is it going to benefit your health? And the answer is no. Whoa. Wow. Yeah, I know. You're supposed to keep in mind who you're talking to here. So.
I do have an antidote to that last response, and that is that the people that live in blue zones, if you've heard of blue zones, do drink alcohol. Part of their whole lifestyle has to do with socialization, and some of the things you say are beneficial, and that's part of it. Where they live, and the youngsters coming up where they have McDonald's and other ultra-processed options, they're pulling these countries that have the blue zones out of the blue zone, literally. Well, blue zone are populations. There's only about 6 of them in the world that have groups of people that live to 100 years old. And they have a very high proportion of them. But you look at them and what they do and how they get there, well, that's another story. They live differently than we do. But my point was, what I was actually going to say was not a question, but just a little tidbit of information. There's a doctor in Austin who is very famous, and he was on 60 Minutes about 3 weeks ago, Dr. Peter Attia. He wrote a book called Outlive, where he talks about medicine and what's happened to it and how it's grown over the years and evolved over the years. And he calls it where we are today as medicine 2.0. And his whole book is about medicine 3.0. Did any of you see that? Yeah, it was. I would just commend you to get his book and read it as more of a reference book. It is very, very full of information.
I think there's some other questions back here. Way in the back. By the way, I know that book. I've read that book. Most of it's very, very good. There's a few things in there about protein intake and so on that I'd be careful about.
Bob,
yes. Okay. Sorry, you got to wait in line for the microphone here. Mark.
yes, from a guy who probably hasn't done the best over the last 70 years at that, of taking care of himself. Are there,
I don't think you should talk about Ray that way.
are there, we read sometimes there are things are some of these things, the damage you've done to your body, reversible
Yes.
at all? Okay.
Yes.
Would you speak to that for just a second?
Oh, you want to know what they are? Oh, gosh. Oh, yeah. Well, for one thing, the first thing I talked about, plaque buildup in the arteries of the heart, coronary artery disease. There is what's called regression that occurs. I have seen it. It occurs. It's real. It's been documented, scientifically proven that plaque that is there can go from an 80% narrowing of the artery to 20% narrowing of the artery, or no narrowing of the artery, or so on. Called regression, very, very real. The answer is yes, it can. How can it? Your next question is going to be, well, how can that happen? It predominantly occurs in individuals that drive their LDL cholesterol very low, like down to 20.
You talked about blood pressure being a very important part of being healthy. Have you done any research on the procedure renal denervation?
Oh, yeah.
What do you think about that procedure?
Yeah. She's asking about renal denervation, whatever. And that's for individuals that have resistant high blood pressure. In other words, it's not amenable, doesn't get under control, doesn't get optimal levels, then there is a procedure to interrupt the nerve supply to the kidneys. And that has been associated with reduction in blood pressure. It's not for everyone. It's not the first thing that you do. It's a thing that can not 100%, but can be of value, particularly when managing it has been resistant to other therapies.
Okay, me, Bob, front row. So I understand cholesterol to be LDL and HDL. You haven't yet. I think I might have said HDL one time this morning. Our family has a history of like very, very low HDL, which has been described to me as a minesweeper, which helps to eat the plaque. And if you have less than 35 or 40 HDL, you don't have all of the parts and pieces. I also know that they don't have medication to affect that necessarily. It's only diet and exercise. But is there any upcoming research that you've heard of that might help? And isn't that true, something that could cause reversal of the plaque buildup?
Everything you said is true, as always. And so Connie will be talking next week about... No, it is. So the HDL, as she said, a minesweeper, like I said, Pac-Man. One of the things that a good cholesterol HDL does is to remove plaque to a degree. And yes, having very low levels is associated with increased risk. The problem is there is not currently any good management of that. For a period of time, niacin was thought to be of value in elevating the HDL. But here's the kicker to that. Despite taking niacin, particularly if a person was taking a statin, there was no benefit in terms of reducing the chance of a heart attack, reducing the chance of a stroke, and so on. So trying to elevate it so far has been unsuccessful. I'm sure, there's a lot of research undergoing now for other medicines to treat high LDL, not so much for treating low HDL. I'm sure there is. I just don't know too much about that. But good question. That's the answer. Yes. Less than 4. Less than 4. Yeah, and the reason, there's science behind that, to say that if the ratio is below 4, then that's a positive thing. It's associated with decreasing risk.
I have a question, Dr. Bob. Dr. Attia promotes women doing a dead hang for 90 seconds and a man doing a dead hang for 2 minutes. I've made it to 12 seconds. Has anybody else tried this? It's really hard. A dead hang is when you without your when you hold on to a rod and your feet aren't touching the floor.
Yeah, that's a good thought. And Tammy, as I thought of something else that I didn't mention that I think is very important. Heart disease is not restricted to men. In fact, heart disease kills 10 times as many women as breast cancer does. Not well known, and why is that? Well, the breast cancer, very well marketed. It's everybody knows about that. Less. In fact, women don't get diagnosed as early. They don't get the preventive screening, but women have considerable increased risk. Yes, Jerry.
Yes, I totally believe in what you're saying for quality of life. But the other day, the CEO of St. Francis, several of us in here live at Montereau, and the CEO of St. Francis, who is also a medical doctor, came, and at the end of what he was talking about, he said, after the age of 70, it's all genetic. He literally said that. He said, it's completely genetic, so go enjoy your ice cream. That's how he ended his conversation. I totally, that's against everything.
Well, I totally disagree with that statement, so that's as much as I'll say. I think they're clear cut, or there's a lot of causes, all these risk factors. I didn't talk about a lot of other environmental factors that are risk factors. There's the air that we breathe, that we believe in air that we breathe, and pollution, and all of the things that cause inflammation. So I think to tell people to just live and be merry and happy and do not worry about your blood pressure, your LDL, your blood sugar, I think is just wrong. I believe he's a surgeon, by the way. Isn't that correct? I could be wrong, but no, I'm serious. I think so.
Your opinion on taking a statin.
I'm sorry?
Your opinion on taking statins to lower cholesterol.
Should be in the water. Should be in the water. No, I'm serious. The question, I don't know if you all could hear that. The question was about taking a statin or not. Well, again, it's not 100%. If you determine that, let's say you do a cardiovascular risk analysis. Let's say you do the polygenic cardiovascular risk assessment that I mentioned to you. Let's say you find that you're at low risk. Your chance of having a heart attack or dying of heart disease in the next 10 years is 3%. And so if you take a cholesterol medicine and you lower your risk by 30%, you're not really getting a lot of benefit from that. So 100% of people, if they're in very low risk groups, should not be, it wouldn't be recommended. But if for an average American whose average LDL is 100, 110, 95, and so on, I think so. I think so. What are we waiting on? 800,000 people dying a year. We need to get going. We need to be aggressive about it, is what I'm saying. That's my opinion, but I think that's backed by science for sure.
I think I saw recently on a news program about aging and people sitting too much.
Yep.
And there was a ratio that I thought I saw was if you sit for 25 minutes, you should stand for 20 and you should move for 10. Is that reasonable?
Yeah.
Or is
Very,
that
very reasonable.
lessening about
Yeah, yeah. Why are you still sitting? Get up, get up. Yeah. Oh, no, Betty, no. Now, Betty's the healthiest person in the room at age 90.
Well, I just read an article this very week.
I don't think that's on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just read an article this very week about a lady that was 80 years old, and all of a sudden she decided she wanted to be more healthy. And so she started watching what she ate and started exercising and even doing a lot of the chair exercises. She improved all of her numbers.
Yeah, good point. Good point, Betty. Keep reading.
Bob, you talked about the increase of cardiovascular disease. Is that linked with the increase in obesity?
Yeah. I alluded to that a little bit. It's basically what's called diabesity. The combination of diabetes and obesity has been thought to be largely responsible for this increase in cardiovascular disease. Yes. And of course, 40% of the American public is obese.
Isn't that research old? Because the GLP-1s are going to flip that, don't you think? Sorry, I couldn't wait. I know. I need a mic.
Yeah.
He's standing right
Yeah. No. She brings up. She brings up a good point. Is that information old? Well, no. Yes, it's old, but it's new. But there's something interesting about the GLP drugs. They are now being researched in Alzheimer's disease. That's an ongoing trial right now. And the results of that, they completed all of their enrollment in the trial, I think, in 2023. And that results are not available yet. But that's going to be fascinating to see for sure. I'm talking about Ozempic and Wegovy and drugs like that. Yeah, I know. What? One thing at a time, Connor? One thing? Yeah, one back here. Oh, Jan.
Okay, that diagnostic test you mentioned, that HSCRP, is that something that doctors do regularly?
No.
I can't ever remember seeing that.
I don't know. They do not.
And how do you get it done?
Ask for it.
Okay.
Ask for it. Say, I would like to know. You could say, I understand inflammation is associated with chronic diseases. I would like to have an HSCRP done to evaluate, do I have inflammation in my body or not? I'm sorry you have to ask for it, but that's the reality.
That very first test that you were talking about that tells you your risk, what's involved with that test? And do you...
The very first one I talked about, let's see. Are you talking about diagnostic tests?
Uh-huh.
Well, I went through the series of stress tests, calcium scoring, CT, not that. The polygenic risk? Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
That one.
Yeah, what's involved with that one, and how do you get that test?
Yeah, it's the analysis, genetic analysis that's done either on blood.
So it's like a BRCA test?
Like a blood or saliva.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you did say
you
sent it to 23.
In Boston, there are two preventive clinics, one associated with the Brigham and one associated with Mass General. And they are at the forefront of this. I mean, there's some really interesting stuff that they're doing in terms of risk analysis. You can contact that clinic and I could give you information about that. Or you could go to, like I said, I think 23andMe is a good resource to investigate that further and in fact even get it done. Insurance, of course, won't pay for it, of course. But, I don't know exactly what the cost is, but that's what I was referring to, and that's how you could get it.
Come on, Mike.
I'd like to point out that Hank has lost 10 pounds by running around with this thing. He's already put us all to shame.
Yeah.
All right, Bob, this is one coming up for Christmas, and I hadn't heard the phrase before, but you and I talked about it one time. Holiday heart. This is a new phrase about the fact that so many people have heart attacks over Christmas. And what can you do to prevent that? Because I think I know it. I don't want to hear it.
I know. Mike, I'll talk to you later out there in the hall. So, yeah, holiday heart is clearly related to predominantly an excess of alcohol. And it's predominantly is related to rhythm disturbances of the heart. Alcohol is clearly associated with atrial fibrillation. That was a relatively recent connection that was made. So avoiding it, of course, is less alcohol. It's not so much related to the sugary things and all that you might eat. I think it's more related to alcohol. And holiday heart refers to a couple of things, one of which has to do with rhythm disorders of the, Connie, you've asked enough. No, that's enough. So
how about marijuana? Does it have the same impact as alcohol on your health?
Well, same impact in terms of what? In terms of heart? Yeah. Marijuana is first off, it's an addicting substance. It is a gateway drug. I'll just say this first and foremost to get that out there. It is harmful predominantly to the respiratory system if it's administered that way. If it's in the gummies that are popular these days, I don't know. I don't think it'll gummy up your heart. Okay, well, so. Well, it's used for nausea associated with cancer and chemotherapy of cancer. It's very effective in managing the nausea. It's being evaluated with PTSD. And so there are some medical causes for it. Absolutely. Yeah, you bet.